Hi, everybody. Welcome to Painted Porch Strategies. This is our weekly Stoic lesson. So for those following along, we are using this book, A Handbook for New Stoics. And this is a fantastic resource because it gives us week by week, there's 52 of them, 52 weeks in a calendar year, no matter what kind of crazy year you are, if it's 2020 or another. And it talks us through a Stoic lesson, and then it gives us a Stoic exercise to do every week. You can hop on and join us at any time. We'll give you some more information about our Facebook page in a little bit. But for this week, we are on week 13, and this is Start Practicing Minimalism. So I'll give you a little overview, and then we're going to kind of open up the discussion. I'd love to hear how this is going in the Yak Hunter house, for sure. So in this interpretation of minimalism, they're talking about how more stuff needs more space and how more stuff can distract you from the main Stoic goal of becoming a better person or building your character. So I just want to put this in context because this is not necessarily about stuff. This is different than Marie Kondo. This is the Stoic version of minimalism, and let's talk about why. So they start with an example of somebody who enjoys collecting things, and as he begins collecting more and more things, he has to build more places to store his things. And he says he doesn't mind building more things, but he's having trouble figuring out where to put it. And his possessions, he's worried that the possessions are taking too much space in his happiness about externals, and that's an external thing. And so our main goal in Stoicism is to work on our character in order to become better people and to approximate ataraxia or mental tranquility. So what they're pointing out to us is that it's okay to have things as long as they don't get in the way of working on your character. In other words, is it blocking you from your main purpose? In yoga, we might say your sankalpa. Like if your goal is to become a better person, is too much stuff just kind of clouding your vision? And what I love too is that they talk about how Seneca's point, too many possessions and likely too much money do get in your way. But they say how he's often criticized for that. And he talks about how he fails at his own expectations because he was a very wealthy man with a lot of stuff. And he writes a letter to Lucilius and says, people say I'm a great man, but, I am, you don't mistake and think that I'm a physician, but I'm a sick man.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. And that's one of the nice things. And we talk about this a lot with Stoicism. There's no such thing as perfection. You're not going to get it right, so to speak. Even the top guys and gals who studied this, they often fell short of it, but they had their compass, to use your term. They had their compass to follow, and they tried as much as they could within the realm and within the world that they were living in. Yeah.
Yes. So it's that balance and they say, Seneca says, you don't need to do away with possessions entirely. You don't need to become a cynic. You don't need to become a vagabond, but you still want to focus on your virtue. So as long as the things that you have don't get in the way of your virtues, it's okay. But what they're trying to get us to do here is to be aware of it and to kind of check that. So for our exercise, they first have us identify some things that we could get rid of. And they kind of have us identify those things. And so first I would love to know what you guys identified as some things that you might be able to get rid of for our exercise this week.
You can go first.
T-shirts. I have lots and lots of T-shirts that I have to go through and get rid of because I probably wear 15 to 20, and I'm looking at them this way. I probably have 100 T-shirts.
Or more.
Yeah. So I definitely pare them down. And it's weird because some of them I have some emotional attachment to, but most of them I do not. But yet there they sit.
Well, and that's the interesting thing, right? That's kind of part of this lesson to expand on what you talked about, Sierra, in that stuff isn't necessarily good or bad, right? It's supposed to be an indifferent, but it's the emotional tax that you have placed on that stuff. Are you tying your happiness to that stuff, or is the existence of the stuff impacting your peace of mind one way or the other? That's really the key. So it's really just making sure that you can be hyper practical with what you have, but you could still, to do a little Marie Kondo, you can still have the things that spark some sort of joy for you, but just recognize what they are and don't give up your emotional contentment to the item itself.
But well, that's interesting too, because we do live in this digital era where if you really wanted to get rid of something and still maintain the memory of it, you could take a picture of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And keep it on your phone or keep it on your hard drive or whatever. But it's interesting too, because it's the process of going through it more so than the keeping or getting rid of, I think, that is important to the Stoics. At least that's the way I interpreted it. It's the idea of really thinking about the things you have and the things you want, rather than just saying, you know what, we got into, what were those things we collected from Disney? Those little they used to sell these little mystery boxes, and you'd open it up and it'd be like a character from Star Wars with the Mickey ears.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun to do because you didn't know what you were going to get. But we ended up with, I don't know, 30 or 40 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Like anytime we'd go to Disney, we'd buy like 4. And there was no reason other than, ooh, this is a surprise. So I don't even know what we did with those.
Oh, they're in a box right here.
We have them in a box. But those might be something we sell or get rid of or keep like 5 instead of the 25 that we had.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Well, and then the question you have to ask yourself is, has it already served its purpose? You got the joy out of it, opening the box, the surprise, but is it giving you joy now, or is it just cluttering and getting in your way? And I think one of the things they're trying to get us to look at is, if it's already served its purpose, to get Marie Kondo, if you decide that you're not going to keep it, say thank you for the joy you gave us, but now it's time for you to move on in the next chapter of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually circled when they were asking us to identify, is on a scale of 1 to 10. This is where you're identifying the things. It's on page 89. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much use or joy does the item bring? So that goes for, there's that old famous quote, like, everything should be useful or bring happiness, and if it's not, then get rid of it. So use, like a cooking pot, right? If you're not using the cooking pot, then get rid of the cooking pot. But if it's something that's beautiful, that brings you joy, so it's like it can serve in one of 2 ways. If the answer is no to both, or if the number is very low, then you can you're reasonably thinking about it. Okay, if it's not providing, if it's a 1 on use, if it's a 1 on joy, it's just bothering me, then okay, I can let it go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think go ahead.
Rob's was T-shirts, and Amy was
one of the ones that I recognize. Well, I've been, everyone has seen the evolution, the ups and downs of this room specifically, because this becomes the room where everything gets sorted, but been going through this continual cycle of, we'll say Stoic Kondoing. Let's combine the 2.
Explain, for those that don't know Marie Kondo, explain who she is.
Yeah, so Marie Kondo, she's this adorable little Japanese woman who she wrote a book called The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up. And then she also, if you're not into books, she also has a special little series on Netflix. And her whole thing, it's based on a Japanese principle. I don't know the name of the principle. Do you, Sierra?
It slips my mind. We'll have to put it into the comments.
Yeah. So it's on this Japanese principle of, it's her version of minimalism, but it's approaching what you keep in your life. You don't focus on necessarily what you want to get rid of. You focus on what you want to keep. And the way she looks at it is does it spark joy for you? And that's where I love that they even mention joy in here. So she literally will sit down and, you know, grab an item, and she wants you, for every single thing in your house, every piece of clothing, every utensil, every piece of paper, whatever it is, she wants you to close your eyes and think and feel whether or not this item brings you joy.
So does that item bring you joy?
No, this is why it's, but we'll talk about that in a minute, because there's also, does it have a use, right? But hers is very much about, does it spark joy? Because to her, just like you said, Sierra, it's, if it doesn't have a use, if it doesn't serve you, whether practically or emotionally, then get rid of it. Because in her philosophy, and I think this is a Japanese philosophy, she looks at it as these objects, these things are like little people, they're little bits of energy. And if you have a bunch of paper stacked in a pile, or you have a bunch of things stuffed in a box or in a closet, if you treat them poorly, it's cruel to them. So she looks at it as it's disrespectful to them. Mm-hmm. Why hide them away when they can bring joy or purpose to someone else? Let them be free to serve their purpose. Don't tuck them away. I thought when I read that, I was like, wow, what a powerful image to think about when you think about the stuff that's in your life. But anyway, so that's Marie Kondo. That's the spark joy premise. So for me, like I said, I've been going on this evolutionary journey. I've been taking a little bit longer than what she wants. She kind of wants you to do a big bang, just throw it, pile everything in your house in the middle and start going through it. But for me, it's been a little bit more of a slow, methodical process. But for me, the thing that I called out the most was books. And what I wrote specifically about the books, because I do love books. We read a lot. There is something about having the physical book versus the Kindle. There's, especially for things like for education, I really like to have highlights and scribbles and notes and Post-its and everything. But what I wrote is, do I keep them to display my intelligence? Do I hang on to them to display how well read or what I may have read? Or can I simply just have read the book, thank it for what it's done for me, and then have it serve someone else in the next realm?
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. That really kind of took it to another level, because, you know, it's, is it conspicuous consumerism? Are you, do you want to have a large library and be able to say, I've read all of these volumes,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And is it to prove something, or can you let it go and just have your own memory of it serve its place? Wow, I like that. And so was that part of your journey this week?
It was, and I've been continuing to kind of think through that and try to pare down the books even more, not just the ones that I've read, but the ones that I haven't read, that I bought, that it's probably not going to happen. So you know what, just let it go. And of the ones that I have read, am I truly going to reference them or reread them? And if not, especially the ones that are more educational books, can I simply create a summary for myself so that way I can refer back to it and say, oh, you know, here were the key points from the book that really stuck with me. I don't need to hang on to the whole book anymore. Yeah. Yeah.
Rob, did you find that you were also having to work through some of the emotional connections with some of the T-shirts?
Yes, because, you know, this is how I think about it. And Amy brought this up years ago. As a man, you know, if you dress like a normal man, you wear a collared shirt to work, you wear slacks or jeans or whatever, you don't have a chance really to express yourself a lot in the way you dress. You don't get to showcase, hey, for me, I really like rap music, so I have a bunch of rap music T-shirts. That's how I display that I like rap music T-shirts. Now, to use Amy's thought is, why do I really need to display that?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that important to me? And is that the reason why they're stacked, you know, 5 rows this high, filled with rap groups that 1 out of 100 people may know.
Mm-hmm.
So it is a similar exploration process. But at the same time, is that okay because it does bring me joy? Because some of them do.
I think there's a balance there, right? It's just like with everything. If everything, because you could get into the part where you're like, oh, but I love this. Oh, but I love this. Oh, but I love this. And you end up having all of this stuff. But if having all of that stuff now has an alternative emotional reaction to you, then it's a problem, right?
Well, on page 87, and when they start introducing the lesson, they talk about this is from Seneca, to diminish the extent of our property in order to be less exposed to the assaults of fortune. Basically saying like the more you have, the more is at risk of being lost.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, is it, and he even talks, I'm going to paraphrase, he talks about like, if your arms are super long, then your arms are going to run into things, like having just enough. Or at least that's how I interpreted what I was reading. It kind of made me giggle. It's like, when is enough, and when is like just the right amount? Another logical side of me says like, what if you did like little capsules, and what if you decided how many you were going to keep and put in like 3 different boxes, and then rotate, like with the change of the season, you change and you put you clean everything, you put them away, and you pull out the new box, and you wear those t-shirts for a season, and then you rotate again at the new season. And then that way you're having variation, but you're still, if they all bring you joy, you're just kind of, and then it's like with children, sometimes we pull toys and we put them away, and then we switch them out, and it's almost like Christmas all over again. Like, oh, I forgot all about this. Oh, this is so fun. And it was theirs all along, but it was like refreshing that, so that's another idea if you wanted to still keep the joy piece to it. And that might actually bring you more joy of rediscovering.
Yeah, I love that. That's such a great idea.
So what about you? What process did you go through, Sierra? Because you just spent time living in a camper with your husband and your son. So it doesn't get much more minimal than that. Because what were you guys on the road for 50 days?
50 days. Yeah, we were on a trip. It's still during the pandemic. So we have a camper. We were in our own space for 50 days. It's a very small camper. So there's not a lot of extra stuff. But so we get back, and we're in the process of getting ready to start virtual school for my son who's going into kindergarten. And we also were, there was also a hurricane and tropical storm a couple days ago. So that's a really fun combination of all of these things. So I actually took it as an opportunity, since we were going to be in the house for some time, like waiting for the storm to pass out after we got everything all secured. And I knew we needed to make some space in our son's room to prepare it for virtual school, to kind of set it up as a classroom. And I'd been putting off like going through some of his stuff. So we did this together. We went through toys, we went through clothes, we went through just stuff that accumulates in his room. And he had emotional attachments to things that he hadn't played with in a long time. So we talked about how, this is kind of a babyish toy. You got a lot of joy out of it, but now you don't use it anymore. And we talked about the emotions of it. Like, don't you think this toy wants to be played with? So we literally went item by item, and he selected a lot of things that we could get rid of. And I gifted some of these things to some moms in my mom's group. And they're like, are you sure you don't want money for this? I'm like, no, just promise me somebody's going to play with it. And, I got to share with him about, like, they sent me pictures of their kids playing with it. And he had this sparked joy that, like, he gave up something that made somebody else happy. And we made space, and it was a great teachable moment. And it gave us something to do while we were waiting for Hurricane Isaias to move on.
That's such a great lesson. And it's something that as adults we can do as well, because again, going back to the whole joy thing, and even with Colt and those toys, the memory of the experience a lot of times is the joy that we feel, but that's a memory that's in the past, you know. And I love the idea, because you could go down a joy spiral very quickly and say, oh, well, this sparks joy, so I'm going to keep it. But it's like, but how is it serving you now? And is looking at and touching it what sparks that memory? Is there a different way that you can, you know, trigger that memory without necessarily keeping the thing itself, to your point, the digital component? But also I just love the fact that the way it was very, very timely with this lesson, but the way you said, you know, wouldn't you love, it's very much like Toy Story, you know, the whole thing about Toy Story, wouldn't you love to have this toy be loved, or this thing be loved by someone and truly played with or engaged with, if we think about it from an adult perspective, worn, read, used, etc., versus
Helping
just
somebody.
sitting in a box. Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, a book that you donate, Amy, that was served you well could open a brand new door for somebody who you pass that book on to.
Right. Exactly. Because for me, the thing I'm definitely more use less joy when it comes to just the way my mind works typically. So that's sometimes where I can get a little bit into trouble, is the practicality of things. You know, because there are certain things that, am I going to use it every day? No. Am I going to use it every quarter? Maybe. But there are certain things that, when needed, it's the Girl Scout in me at the end of the day, that if there's a need, I got you covered, or I got us covered, because, you know, I have that thing, whatever that thing may be. Like I tend to hold on, and I'm sure Chris does this too a little bit, but I tend to hold on to little scraps of things, you know, like pieces of wood, or I have, you know, slews of extra screws and stuff, and, you know, different hardware things, because I am always like, I can MacGyver something. I can figure something out based on what I have available. But that, then it does become clutter that sits there waiting for a purpose. But
which sometimes is even more hidden, because that's the kind of thing you put in the garage and you don't see. For example, Amy has, 3 wooden pallets in the yard?
Yeah, because we're going to make pallet furniture.
Yeah, that's what she keeps saying.
Okay.
Yeah, but in the meanwhile, while that process works itself out, there are the pallets.
Sit.
Yes.
And they drive Rob crazy.
Which is the one thing. I mean, not much drives me crazy in that regard. Except for those sitting in the yard.
In our step 2 of our lesson, this is on page 90 for those following along, is to identify a date when something is going to happen. Mm-hmm. So the item, the research, the donate, recycle, dispose, or when to get rid of, is if that is something that you've identified that you want to do, but it's causing Rob frustration, is maybe for you guys to come up with a plan of, okay, we haven't turned it into the furniture, and if we don't, then we're going to let those pallets go, or we're going to burn them in our fire pit, or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's a good idea.
I don't know if that's on the list, but I just was, as I was looking through our step 2, of what they suggest that you do. That way it's basically being mindful of that. And you could set it out I love how they talk about in step 5, to write your action plan in your to-do list or calendar. So the things that you've identified as a priority to do, if you actually identify them and then you make them happen in that time frame.
Right. Yeah.
Which is nice, and it ties it in together to have a plan, rather than just, hey, look, there's the T-shirts for me. Okay, now what? Put it on the calendar, pick a date, do it. Because otherwise, you'll do exactly what you've been doing the entire time.
Well, and not to get super stoic for a moment, but I also occasionally practice a little bit of our favorite term, premeditatio malorum. And I always think about, as I'm going through things, or as I'm assessing a room or assessing what's in the space, I'm like, if our house burned down, this is like the stuff that goes in my mind. If our house burned down, what would I be truly sad that we lost. And through that, it gets me to think about not just the stuff that we have, but how I'm protecting it, I think is the word that I would use. You know, how I'm keeping it safe. And so that's something that goes through my mind as well. So, because it could happen. There's nothing that says it couldn't.
Yeah.
But if it happened, you know, what would I be most disappointed about losing? So
It's true. That's true. And I get to practice this kind of in a real world situation, because we have like hurricane bins,
Mm-hmm.
and we have like our things that are truly our valuable things, like our passports, our deeds, my great grandmother's wedding ring. We have all those things in one spot, so that if there's a storm coming and we need to evacuate, those items are already, and man, that's a great way to kind of think about, you know, and luckily a hurricane, you usually have a good amount of warning, but if you think about things that have no warning at all, what is the plan, or what have you already identified that irreplaceable? I mean, you could argue and say that some of your favorite concert t-shirts are no longer available except through eBay, maybe, or that, you know, this collection of screws, you'll never find that again. But truly, like, if it's whatever you can carry, then, and when you start thinking like that, like, shit gets real fast.
Yeah. Well, because, you know, and we even say right at the bottom of 91, at the end of the review, you know, you can be satisfied with little. And so, you know, focus on what's most important in your life. And so that's something that, you know, I have to constantly revisit and remind myself of when it comes to the stuff that is in our home, or that is in my life or your life or what have you. That's something that I think about. You know, what's replaceable, to your point, and what's not. And that really helps when it comes down to true minimalism. At the end of the day, what do you truly need to...
But they do draw a distinction, which in the group of the Cynics, which goes the almost opposite extreme of not having anything. And obviously, from how we modernize that term, really cynical about everything, a word that means dog-like, which I did not know, because the critics thought they lived like dogs rather than as human beings. So they, according to this, sought an existence with no material possessions and no effective bonds. So the Stoic part is saying, okay, that's that monk-like existence, right? That Amy's talked about, where you can go retreat in a temple somewhere and think about the meaning of life because you don't have anything and all you do is that. But in the real world application where we go to work, that is the Stoic way. So the Cynic way would be more monk-like, and the Stoic way is, okay,
Cynics are basically just a bunch of homeless people.
well, but that's how they want to be, right? But that's, I mean, kind of monks are kind of like that. Like they have a...
They're not homeless, though. I mean, they are self-sustaining. They can...
Well, but you get what I'm saying. It's very minimal. It's minimal to an extreme.
Right.
Just like the Cynics. That's what they have in common. I'm not comparing the Cynics
Their
to
livelihood.
the monks and the practices, but the very basic versus how most of us live now. So most of us just buy stuff to buy it. You know, because we live in a consumer-driven world where you go on a laptop or a phone, even click a button, boom, it sends you your house in the next day. Yeah. So it's trying to find that balance between, you know, being the monk or the Cynic and the overabundant person who just buys stuff. And if you go back to even the food example we talked about, is what's the environmental impact on buying those things? So especially if it's shipped to your house, because now it's put in a truck on a car with cardboard that's made somewhere in a factory, and you have all these factors. You have gas, you have emissions, you have, you know, is it really worth the emissions you're putting out in a huge box to get something this big?
Especially since it's probably going to end up in a storage facility.
Yeah, well, that's it too. I mean, the number of storage facilities
that makes me
in
crazy.
Every city in America it's got to be a multi-billion-dollar business.
Oh yeah.
And to take it even broader to in a spiritual sense, is you can't take any of that with you. And the Stoics talk about the only thing you really own is your own virtue, your character is that's the only thing that cannot be taken from you. You know, you cannot lose that. Whereas all of our stuff, our houses, our even people that are part of your important family team, all of that can go away. The only thing that you really have is your character. So you both brought up, emotional ties of, the why do I need to show people, or why do I need to, it's, have you already gotten from it what you need? Has your character already benefited? Have you already reaped the rewards of that? Is the thing just an empty shell of a thing now?
Mm-hmm.
At what point can you say, okay, I'm ready? And it's a big step, because we live in a society of stuff. I mean, we do. So most people don't park in their garage because their garage is full of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a tough thing, but I think actually when you start to embrace this idea of what you have control over and what you really own, is it can be very freeing, because you're like, okay, well, cool.
Yeah. And I saw something recently, a minimalism blog or organization, and it's a very simplistic quote, and I don't want to oversimplify it because it can be a little contrite, but it says, if you're stressed about how to organize, you have too much stuff. Basically, if you don't know where to put something, or you're trying to figure out how to organize it, it's because you have too much. So organization is, necessary if you have too many things to worry about. So that kind of, I read that and I was like, yeah, I get what you're saying, but you still have to organize like thumbtacks and stuff. You still, there's things that still has to have a little compartment.
Well, again, not every quote applies to every
I know,
situation.
but I'm just saying, from a broad sense, it's a great way to think about it. If you're trying to think, where do I need to put something, or how can I?
It's back to Amy Screws is what she's saying.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna let that one go.
Yeah. So, and I think it's best to understand that all of this is practices, and all of this is things to just start to bring your attention to it. At the end of each week, it asks us, was this helpful? Was this useful? And you can find the information useful even if it's something that's still a continuing part of your journey.
Well, all of this is constant practice, to your point. Yes.
Oh, that's
what life
is.
Really?
That is, yes.
Yeah.
Life is a series of practice.
But it's like, if you do life right, it's lessons you learn along the way and trying to apply them as best as you can. Mm-hmm. And that's the same thing with a virtue. It's let's say you have these Stoic virtues, which are what? What are the Stoic virtues?
The Stoic virtues?
Yeah, what do they talk about as the virtues?
Wisdom, temperance, courage, and oh my gosh, you just put me on the spot.
I know I did. But that's the point, right? That's exactly the point. So you get to certain moments where your courage is going to be tested, your temperance is going to be tested, and you're not always going to succeed, but those are still the common virtues.
Yeah.
Judgment.
Did it. Yeah.
Yes. But see, that's it, right? Like sometimes you get put on the spot and you don't know. Because I didn't know what they were. That's why I asked you. Honestly. But that's it. So you're going to come to moments where you judge. Like for example, there's some things going on in my family, and there's certain people judging certain situations, and we'll get more into details as we work these things out. But trying to be
dirty laundry.
Well, but it's just trying to be temperate about it is a challenge, and trying not to judge other people who are judging is a challenge, and you're always going to be challenged by those virtues, because you can't do it 100% of the time, and you shouldn't expect yourself to be courageous 100% of the time.
Right.
You shouldn't be expecting yourself to be a minimalist 100% of the time.
Right.
That's not the point. Like you guys have said, it's a practice, just like the virtues of Stoicism are a practice. It's an ideal.
Well, and I always go to the temperance too, because temperance or moderation, if that word resonates with you more, it's all about like just taking it with a grain of salt, or taking it, moderating. And sometimes you have to self-moderate too. Like for example, like drama within a team is the drama can exist, but you can decide how much you want to engage or invest into that energy. The same way with minimalism, for some people, they might read this and say, man, I'm going to go for it. Like, I'm going to pare way back and I'm going to see how it feels. And other people might say, you know what? My stuff, I have too much, but it's not getting in the way of me building my character. It's not a roadblock. It's not an obstacle for me. So I'm okay with where it is. It's always finding that balance out. And that's I mean, if that's going to change day by day, hour by hour.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Go easy on yourself sometimes. You know, it's
Yes.
As long as you're trying, you don't have to be your own worst critic, as most of us are anyways.
Right. And the thing that I liked about this lesson specifically, and they've done this for several of them, but I do like how they very much hold your hand along the way. And they're like, don't just jump off the deep end. You know, don't feel that you have to go like all into minimalism and then stress yourself out a whole other way. I liked, to your point in step 3, where it's like, schedule it. Just make a point to plan for it. It doesn't have to be right now. It doesn't need to be always. Schedule it. Schedule when you're going to do it. You know, if you do want to take the Kondo method, it doesn't have to be your house is in disaster for, 3 weeks or a month or however long it takes you. You know, you can do category by category if that really helps you. You know, be realistic with yourself, but also be willing to feel the discomfort a little bit, but not to the point where you're developing anxiety.
Get used to it.
Yeah.
Use that feeling and know you can overcome it.
The push. Yeah.
One of the things I wrote down in that planning ahead is, so I really like to have some little decorations for holidays or seasons. And I don't have a fireplace at my house, but I have a piano. And so I kind of like do a little decoration for holidays or like little seasons. And I put things into bins and then I write on it like Halloween or Halloween and fall.
Yep.
And while I don't want to get down all of those bins and go through all of them, I put on a little sticky, like each time you bring that bin down to decorate with it is get rid of the things that you don't like anymore from that bin. Don't go ahead and donate them, or give them away or whatever it is, so that it becomes like, don't just because it was already in the bin, keep it in the bin. It was like, continue to have that be a process every time I do my goofy little decorating.
I love that, because then it's just part of the natural process or the natural step of what you're doing. You're pulling out, you're putting back, as opposed to saying, okay, I'm going to tackle X on Y day, and then other things get in the way. You're just like, I'm just not in the right mindset. So it doesn't psychologically mess with you, because it's just part of the natural process.
Yeah.
It's
that editing.
Yeah, I like that. That's good. So yeah, I really like this. I especially liked the intentional component of it, instead of just saying, just go do it. Number 1, pick 5 things. Okay, it doesn't mean you have to get rid of all those 5. Just start to think about it. Think about the 5. And then from there, think about, okay, based on how you ranked them, what could you realistically do? And then what does it take to do it? And it doesn't have to be this monumental effort to do it. Like you said, it can be something small that you just integrate into your routine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's bringing that mindfulness to it. Once you start bringing your attention to it, then you can really look at it from a reasonable standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
And I also liked how it kind of could take it in pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So next week is evaluate your goals.
Mm-hmm.
And is it Amy or Rob next week leading us up?
I think I'm up.
You are
I
up.
am up.
Amy. Okay. So Amy's going to be our moderator for next week. So if you're joining us or if you're seeing this, you can sign up. We have a Facebook group where you can join in on the discussion. We'd love to have you. This is a handbook for new Stoics, and you can find the book on Amazon. You can join us. If you have questions, shoot us a message. We'd love to have you take this journey with us to becoming more Stoic.
Yes, absolutely. And to sign up, there is a link at the bottom of this video on YouTube, both for the book as well as to sign up for the Facebook group. And again, as Sierra said, we'd love to have you join us, give your perspectives, your insights, your ahas as you go through this journey to become, I wouldn't say a Stoic, because you don't necessarily have to, it's not necessarily if you're interested in Stoicism, but if you're just really interested in finding ways to navigate this world that, as they say right on the front of the book, that is out of your control, and understanding the idea of control, what's within your sphere of control, and how you can ultimately, to use a Sierra term, live your best life through some of these practices and principles. So thank you, Sierra. Amazing job. We'll continue to check back and see what we've purged in our lives from our stuff perspective. And we look forward to seeing each of you next week as we evaluate our goals. So thanks for joining us on the porch.